Earlier this week, Western Cape Premier Alan Winde said provincial law enforcement officers would arrest Russian President Vladimir Putin should he set foot in the province. Putin is expected to visit South Africa in August for the BRICS summit in Cape Town. So let's look at what options are available for government to avoid a diplomatic fallout should Putin come and not be arrested. I'm joined by legal expert Mpumelelo Zikalala. Mpumelelo, thank you so much for making time for us. Let me first get your thoughts on what the Western Cape Premier Alan Winde said last week, that if Vladimir Putin sets foot in the Western Cape, he will be arrested. Obviously, he knows very well he doesn't have control over the SAPS. Yes, his province has been trying to make the case for the devolution of the police powers to provinces, but as things stand now, he has no authority whatsoever to instruct the police to execute any arrest mandate whatsoever. What did you think? Because he seemed to lack the understanding of, I suppose, the complexities of effecting an arrest on a head of state. Some people said it made him look like a clown, but other people said, well, he's a man who just wants to uphold the rule of law.
I think in doing that, you must then understand which law you are going to uphold. And now our constitution is clear in terms of having one security police or one police service that you are going to have. In this case, it's the South African Police Service. So every other law enforcement agency that would come in, either on a provincial level or a municipal level, would derive their powers from the Constitution and from the South African Police Services Act. Now, you can then not say, or you can't say as a premier, this is what I'm going to instruct, because they do not get instructions from you. They get the instructions from the commissioner and not you as a premier. So if there's no, you can't effect an arrest warrant as a premier or instruct someone to go and effect it, because you simply have no powers in doing so. You are a political head of that particular province, and that's where it starts and that's where it ends. So he may have been a bit misled as to the type of powers that he may have, the type of instructions that he may be able to issue. But the buck will only stop with the South African Police Service, having received instructions saying that this is what we must execute based on the Roman statute that we are part of, based on the other Interpol and treaties that we have signed. But for the premier to then issue out a bold statement similar to that, I think it was a bit mistaken. He does not have those powers at all.
Okay, so the confusion over whether or not we are withdrawing from the ICC has been cleared, I think. As things stand, we remain a signatory. There is no intention to withdraw, but there is an option that the ANC government is considering to push through legislation that indemnifies heads of state from arrest while on South African soil. Could that help?
It could help. And I think what the ANC was trying to do here was to say, let's separate the political party from government. We may, as the ANC, have taken a particular stance in terms of how we want to deal with us remaining part of the Roman statute, being able to assist when we need to arrest hardcore criminals, for example, and us being able to exercise our sovereignty as a country. Now, in doing that, we've discussed it within our corner as the ANC. However, when you need to translate it into government, there are certain procedures that will need to be followed. And one of those procedures is when the issue is being tabled in Parliament, for example, it mustn't be seen as if there's already been a already conceived idea. So no matter what is stated, no matter in which way in which you're supposed to vote, there's no consciousness, there's no integrity or independence of the mind of the parliamentarian which is going to be applied, because they've since adopted this particular stance. So they're simply doing some damage control from the political side and saying that, yes, as a political side party, we may have decided we have not gone for the ultimate prize of remaining or removing ourselves completely from the Roman statute, but what we are doing is that we're adding a provision of saying that any head of state or sitting head of state is not going to be arrested by us. Understand the political ramifications of that, understand the type of tensions which are going to follow, not only on the political side and from a neighbor to neighbor, from country to country, but there are also economic sanctions that may follow. You are not the all and be all when it comes to things that need to happen from country to country in our trading treaties. So take note of that before you take a bold decision of saying that certain individuals must be arrested, especially when they fall within South African soils. Also remember, you have a president of Russia who is going to come in and discuss issues of economic development. Once economic development comes into the country, there are a number of benefits which are going to flow. Increase in employment is going to be there. Increase in trade is going to be there. Now, to simply take a matter in which South African has no business in handling and saying, we want you to execute on this particular part because you've signed a certain treaty, is not something in which maybe they could have understood when they signed earlier. But now they have a better understanding, so for them, it's much more easier to say, on sitting heads of state, we're not going to perform this obligation that is expected from us.
No, it's a little laughable that they also sign without understanding fully what the obligations would be. But to be clear, Mpumelelo, this proposed legislation won't be law by the time the BRICS summit sits in August. So it's not going to necessarily help government deal with this conundrum that's facing them now, because it's going to take time.
No, not at all. Especially, you see, in South Africa, we have a reputation of our legislatures taking a very long time in order to change our laws.
Yeah.
So it's going to take a very long time before it goes to Parliament, it goes to the NCOPs, it then goes to the ICC, for example. It forms as part of the articles that need to be ratified. It's accepted by the ICC. Only then it comes back for us to be gazetted again, and then it is law within our country. So we are looking at plus minus 5 years if I'm being optimistic. And certainly it's not going to happen within that period of time. What they could do, though, is to go to the ICC and say, let's try and negotiate these options that we have, understand where we are coming from. Are you willing to make an exception when it comes to this particular point? These are the type of diplomatic relations that you are trying to save. If not, the second option is to clearly defy that particular order and deal with the ramifications when they've already taken place, and which is something that they've done before with another African president that was here in South Africa, who ended up not finishing their term or their visit due to them having to go, so that we do not find ourselves in trouble. So there are a number of options that are there, but the most clear one would be to say, on a long-term effect, let's change this particular laws, let's add this exception so that we can be able to meet our economic demands or our neighbor demands, or our international relations can then be saved. But it then also focuses on the manner in which our legislature is working. If it takes this long for a law to come into effect, the fruits of that particular law are not going to be enjoyed now.
Yeah.
Now, let's take on something which has to do with our social impact or social demands that we are looking for South Africans. It simply says it takes for a very long time in order for the legal process that needs to be engaged in when we are creating this particular legislation to come in effect. By the time a legislation comes into effect, it does not bear the fruits in which it was intended to bear, and is no longer effective as it ought to have been before. So I think it must also be an eye-opener to our parliamentarians in terms of saying, please note, we are paying you very huge funds for you to be in Parliament, and please do your job by making sure that you are able to pass this legislation as quickly as possible.
Mpumelelo Zikalala, thank you for making time for us this afternoon.